Hello again, I'm Simon, and this week I thought I'd talk about planning ahead. Just sort of lead on from last week's episode on traffic lighting, because they are pretty heavily interlinked. So, planning ahead's obvious, we're thinking about what we're doing before we get there. So, why would you plan ahead? Simply, the reason you plan ahead is so that you don't always stop at a control and go, I need to go left, and you're not having to stop constantly, which means that you lose all momentum. It also means that you can think about things further ahead, and so for sprints especially, it's particularly important because it means you don't get stuck by traps. So I'm just going to talk about what I do when I'm planning ahead, where I plan ahead, and sort of what I'm thinking of. So an example would be start to 1. So from the start triangle, of course, you can't plan ahead, so I always take the first bit slowly, just try and get in the hang of things. So as I'm running through into the bush, it's like an open track there that I'd probably follow, but I did follow. As I'm doing that slowly. I'm thinking, what am I looking for? What's coming up? And I'm forming a very rough plan of what I'm doing. So I'm coming through there. My first thought, what are the obvious features on the way I'm looking for? So there's a hill here, the hill system here, and there's this vegetation boundary here, which may or may not be obvious. Now I've thought about all of that by the time I've got to the end of that track. Menu, stop. And so that means that once I've come out of this track, here, I can just start running knowing what I'm looking for. So I'm running, and I can look up and around. I can see hill system, vegetation boundary into my control. Of course, I don't then arrive at 1 and go, right, what am I doing? So as I'm running, I'm looking for bits where I don't have to navigate that heavily. So while running through this blank area here, because I know I'm looking for these hill systems, so I don't need to concentrate too heavily on the map there, I can think about what am I doing for 1 to 2. And the first thing that comes to mind is, well, it's fairly flat, I'll just take a bearing. So I'm going to come along the line here, and then what's my attack point for number 2? Oh, it's going to be this hill. Now I've already got, therefore, planned out my attack point and what I'm doing on that leg. And it's not a very complex thing, and I'll probably refine it a little bit further. But ideally, I have all of that planned out as I'm coming over through this flat area and over these hills. So about here is where I probably get to when I'm thinking about that kind of stuff. Ideally a bit earlier, depends on the day and how long the leg is. So that means that as I'm coming into 1, I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to come out, I'm going to take a left, I'm just going to take a bearing. That leads straight into 2. And so while I'm taking my bearing to 2, I'm looking up and around for things, but I'm thinking, how am I getting from 2 to 3? And 2 to 3 is super short legs, so all I'm thinking about again, how am I leaving 2? What's my attack point for 3? How am I getting there? So from 2 to 3, I'm probably thinking about it in this bit just before I hit the road, or as I run along the edge of this ridge here, because that's all simple navigation I've already figured out beforehand. I'm going to take a fairly sharp right, and it's going to be just over a hill system. And so come into 2, sharp right, over a hill system into 3. Now, of course, for the more complicated legs, often the planning ahead breaks down a little bit, or sometimes it breaks down a little bit. And if, of course, you make a mistake, then the planning ahead's not going to help, and that sometimes throws me. So, for example, 3 to 4, as I was coming over from 3, I hadn't quite planned because it was such a short leg. I planned I'm going to go to the road and just take this bearing. Not the best of plans. As I'm running, again, I'm running slowly because I don't have a full plan of what my leg is. And I'm thinking, what am I looking for? In this case, I'm thinking, there's a couple of hills here. There's this indistinct track I might see. And there's this sharp vegetation band just before the control. And the control itself is in the depression in the re-entrant. And so I'm thinking all of that as I'm running, because I didn't have time to think about, well, I didn't plan ahead enough. I'm doing it as I'm leaving 3, but I know roughly my exit direction because I've already done that as I'm coming from 2 to 3 or from the road to 2. So come through here and I'm thinking, right, okay, let's refine this rough plan. My rough plan is basically take a bearing and hope I don't miss, which is kind of not a great plan. But as I'm running it, I'm thinking, okay, what am I looking for? Vegetation boundary, track. There's a couple of hills on the right if I go too far to the right. And so I actually veer slightly to the right in the hopes that I hit it. So that's the basics of planning ahead, and it's really quite simple. All you do is you take it a little bit slow when you don't know what you're doing. Then when you do know what you're doing, you can speed up. So I thought I'd just try and make a much shorter video this time because, well, it's not something I need to talk at length about. I could go through the entire course talking about how I plan ahead for each leg, but that's not really worth doing. So, till next week, bye. I'll see you again with another orienteering technique.